Welcome back, deep divers. Ready for another deep dive with us? Today, we're tackling Stoicism, but not just Stoicism in general. No, we're going way, way back to the OG, the man himself, Zeno of Citium.
Zeno.
Okay, so Stoicism, it's like having a moment, right? Everyone's talking about it. But this guy, Zeno, lived over 2,000 years ago. So what can we learn from him, in our crazy modern world?
That's the question, isn't it?
And here's the thing. Turns out Zeno wasn't even Greek.
Yeah, that always throws people off.
And the connection to Marcus Aurelius, not what you'd expect at all.
It's fascinating how all these pieces connect.
So let's get into it. What do we actually know about this guy Zeno?
Well, that's the first hurdle, honestly. We know so little about his actual life.
Really?
Our main source. It's a biography, but get this, written centuries after he lived.
Wow. Okay, so how do we even know if that's reliable? Like, how do historians deal with that?
It's tricky. You have to cross-reference, look for clues in other writings from the time period, and be very careful about taking anything as absolute fact.
So a lot of detective work.
Exactly. But there are some intriguing details we can piece together, like, for example, his background.
Right. He was like Phoenician, wasn't he? That's not your typical Greek philosopher.
Not at all.
So for folks who, haven't brushed up on their ancient history lately,
Sure.
who were these Phoenicians?
Okay, so picture this. The ancient Mediterranean. And these guys, the Phoenicians, they were the masters of the sea. Expert sailors, incredible traders. They even established this powerful city, Carthage, Rome's biggest rival.
Oh, yeah.
For centuries, they were at odds. And the Phoenicians' homeland, connected to modern-day Lebanon, which makes Zeno's story even more unique.
Right, because that adds a whole other layer of cultural influence.
Absolutely.
And here's another thing that I find interesting. Zeno's family, they were wealthy merchants, right?
Very wealthy.
But he chose to live this, super simple life. Was that a deliberate rejection of his upbringing?
It certainly suggests a leaning towards a less materialistic path, even early on.
Makes you think, doesn't it?
And we know he was influenced by the Cynics.
The Cynics.
Those philosophers who advocated for radical simplicity, rejecting possessions and social norms.
Like full-on hippies of the ancient world.
Haha, kind of. But with more emphasis on virtue. Now, here's the interesting part. Zeno was drawn to them, but he ultimately broke away.
Why? Wasn't cynicism the perfect fit for someone rejecting a life of luxury?
Well, while the Cynics were all about rejecting societal norms, living simply close to nature, they did it in a very provocative way, almost confrontational. Zeno seemed to be searching for a path that was more structured, more philosophical.
Less shock value, more substance.
Precisely. He was drawn to their focus on virtue, but maybe not their methods.
So instead of joining their party, he started his own.
Yeah.
And that brings us to the famous Stoa, right?
You got it.
So paint us a picture, set the scene.
Imagine you're in ancient Athens. You're walking through the agora, the bustling marketplace. Crowds, vendors, all this energy. And you come across this covered walkway called the Stoa Poikile.
The Stoa.
It's a public space where people would gather, chat, escape the sun.
Sounds pretty chill.
And this becomes Zeno's classroom.
Wow, so not some grand academy, just a glorified sidewalk.
It's amazing, isn't it, the birthplace of Stoicism?
And this seemingly ordinary location is how the Stoics got their name, right?
You know it.
Kind of makes you think, You don't need a fancy platform to share powerful ideas.
The best ideas often spring from the most unexpected places.
So picture this, okay? It's around 301 BCE. Zeno's teaching in the Stoa. These are the very early days, the very beginnings of Stoicism. But was it the same as the Stoicism we know today?
That's a great point to bring up, because what we call Stoicism today, it's actually the result of centuries of thought and development.
So it wasn't like a finished product right away?
Not at all. Think of it like a tree, Zeno planted the seed, but it took generations of thinkers to nurture it, to shape it into what we know today.
Gotcha. So what were those early seeds? What were those core ideas that resonated even back then? What was Zeno teaching that made people stop and listen?
Well, one of the most central concepts is this idea of living in accordance with nature, or, as the Stoics put it, living in accordance with logos.
Logos.
Yeah, and this is where things get really interesting.
Okay, so living in accordance with nature. I mean, that sounds kind of passive, doesn't it? Like just, accepting whatever happens.
I can see how it might seem that way at first.
But I have a feeling there's more to it, right?
Oh, absolutely. Logos is a much bigger concept than just, trees and rivers.
Mm-hmm.
It's more like universal reason, the underlying order of the cosmos. It's what governs everything.
Whoa. Okay, but how does that translate to, like, real life? What if Logos decides, I don't know, your city gets destroyed, which, happened a lot back then.
Right, well, that's where the emphasis on what we can control comes in. Stoicism isn't about passively accepting everything that happens. It's about recognizing that we can't control external events, but we can control our thoughts and reactions to them.
So it's not about giving up, but about mastering your inner world.
You got it.
Even when the outer world is a mess.
Exactly.
That makes a lot more sense. And it kind of explains how figures like Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor, could embrace Stoicism. You wouldn't think the most powerful man in the world would be into, like, acceptance.
It is a fascinating paradox, isn't it?
Total paradox. So how does that work? How do you reconcile being emperor with, accepting what you can't control?
Well, think about it. Even an emperor faces things beyond his control, right? Betrayals, uprisings, even the limits of his own body. Stoicism gave him a framework for dealing with those challenges with grace and resilience.
So even at the top, there are still things you can't control.
Exactly.
And that's where Stoicism comes in.
It's a timeless philosophy. And in a way, it's even more relevant today.
Oh, for sure. I mean, just think about the world we live in.
Constant information overload, anxiety, things feeling out of control.
It's like that feeling when you spill coffee all over yourself 5 minutes before a big presentation,
Yes.
but amplified like 1,000 times.
Social media, the news cycle, it's a lot to process.
So is that why Stoicism is making a comeback?
Yeah.
Because it offers, like, a way to find calm in all the chaos?
I think that's a big part of it.
It's like Zeno, back in that Athenian walkway, was tapping into something fundamentally human, that need to find meaning, even when everything feels out of control.
I agree. There's a timeless wisdom there, a way of finding peace and clarity amidst the storm.
And to really understand that, to get why these ancient ideas still resonate today, we need to go deeper. Beyond just living in accordance with nature, we need to understand what that looks like in practice.
And that's where things get really exciting.
Okay, so lead the way. What's next?
Let's dive into some of the core principles of Stoicism and see how they can help us navigate our own modern lives.
Let's do it. Okay, so we've been talking about this whole logos thing, this concept of universal reason. But how do we actually apply that to everyday life? Like, let's say, I spill coffee all over myself 5 minutes before a big presentation. Am I supposed to just smile and be like, oh, well, that's logos at work?
Well, not exactly. That's where the Stoic practice of managing our emotions comes in.
Managing emotions.
Yeah, they identified 4 key emotions that can really throw us off track. Fear, anger, grief, and excessive joy.
Wait, hold on. Excessive joy? You mean, like, being too happy is a bad thing? I always thought Stoicism was about being, like, super serious all the time.
That's a common misconception. It's not about suppressing all emotions. It's more about recognizing that our emotions can sometimes cloud our judgment and lead us to make decisions we regret.
Okay, yeah, I can see that.
Like, imagine you win the lottery, but you let that joy lead you to spend recklessly. You might end up worse off than before. The Stoics were all about balance, finding lasting contentment, not these fleeting highs and lows.
So in that coffee-stained shirt scenario, a Stoic wouldn't, like, freak out or get angry.
Right. They'd take a moment to process the situation and then focus on what they could control, like finding a backup shirt or cleaning up the mess.
So it's about shifting your perspective from why me to, okay, what can I do about this?
Exactly.
Not denying your feelings, but choosing how you respond to them.
I like that.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like taking back control, even when things feel totally out of control.
And that sense of control over your inner world, that's what the Stoics believed led to true happiness.
True happiness, not just like fleeting pleasure.
Right. They were after lasting tranquility and virtue.
Okay, so managing your emotions is key. But there's also a social aspect to Stoicism, right? It's not just about individual well-being, is it?
You're absolutely right. The Stoics believed we're all interconnected, part of this universal logos, and that naturally led to an emphasis on living in harmony with others, contributing to the common good.
So it's not just about inner peace, but about being a good person and, like, making a positive impact on the world around you.
Precisely.
That reminds me of Marcus Aurelius again, leading an empire, making decisions that affect millions of people, and he's using Stoicism as his guiding philosophy.
And it wasn't just him. Many Stoic philosophers were actively involved in public life, serving as advisors, teachers, even politicians. They saw their philosophy as a way to improve society, to create a more just and harmonious world.
So it wasn't about retreating from the world and becoming a hermit. It was about engaging with the world in a mindful, ethical way.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that our actions have a ripple effect. By striving to live virtuously, we not only improve our own lives, but we contribute to the well-being of those around us.
This is really making me rethink my whole view of Stoicism. It's not just about enduring hardship with a stiff upper lip, but about actively cultivating a mindset that allows you to navigate life's challenges with wisdom and grace.
I think you're getting to the heart of it.
And I think that's why Zeno's ideas continue to resonate so strongly today.
Mm.
We live in a world that often feels overwhelming, unpredictable, a bit scary even.
Absolutely.
And Stoicism offers us a framework for finding our footing amidst all the chaos.
It reminds us that while we can't control everything that happens, we can control how we react, how we choose to see the world, how we treat others.
It's like Zeno, standing in that Athenian walkway over 2,000 years ago, was offering a message of resilience and hope that transcends time.
And it speaks to that deep human longing for purpose, meaning, connection, even in the face of hardship.
So if Zeno were here with us today, what do you think he would say to someone struggling to find peace and purpose amidst all this craziness?
That's a great question, and one that takes us to the heart of Zeno's legacy. To answer it, I think we need to shift from the theoretical to the practical. Zeno didn't just talk about philosophy, he embodied it.
Okay, so we're talking about Zeno's legacy, not just as a philosopher, but as someone who actually walked the walk.
Exactly.
So what specific lessons can we draw from the way he lived?
Well, one that stands out is his commitment to simple living. Remember, he came from a wealthy family, but chose a life of moderation, focusing on what truly mattered.
That resonates with a lot of movements today, like minimalism and mindful consumption. Maybe Zeno was on to something centuries ago. It's so easy to get caught up in that cycle of wanting more stuff, thinking it'll bring happiness.
Exactly. Zeno seemed to understand that our desires can be endless, and that constantly chasing after material things often leads to dissatisfaction. By simplifying his life, he freed himself from those anxieties and was able to focus on what brought true fulfillment.
That's such a powerful reminder, especially in our consumer-driven culture. It's like you might find more happiness by focusing on experiences rather than accumulating possessions. What are some things you could simplify in your life?
That's a great question for self-reflection. And this idea of simple living ties into another key aspect of Zeno's legacy, his emphasis on self-control. The Stoics believe that mastering our desires and impulses is essential for inner freedom and tranquility.
So it's not about denying yourself all pleasure, but being mindful of your choices and not letting your desires control you. It's like enjoying a delicious meal, but not overindulging just because it tastes good.
Precisely. It's about finding that balance between enjoyment and moderation. And self-control applies to more than just physical desires. It's also about managing our thoughts, reactions, and impulses in all areas of life.
It's like building a mental muscle, right? The more you practice self-control, the stronger you become at resisting temptations and making choices that align with your values.
I like that analogy. And this practice of self-control cultivates another crucial Stoic virtue, resilience. Remember, the Stoics believed we can't control external events, but we can control our responses.
So when life throws you a curveball, instead of panicking or giving up, you take a deep breath, assess the situation, and figure out how to navigate it. You can't always prevent the storm, but you can learn to weather it.
Beautifully put. It's about developing that inner strength and fortitude to face challenges with grace and determination. This resilience is what allows us to not only survive difficult times, but to actually grow and learn from them.
You know, all these pieces are starting to fit together: simple living, self-control, and resilience. These aren't just abstract philosophical concepts, they're practical tools we can all use to build a more meaningful and fulfilling life.
And that brings us back to why Stoicism is so relevant today. I think Zeno and the Stoics who followed him tapped into something timeless, the human need for purpose, meaning, and connection, even in the face of hardship.
In a world that can feel increasingly chaotic and overwhelming, Stoicism offers a path to inner peace and clarity. It empowers us to take responsibility for our own well-being and to live a life that is both fulfilling and meaningful. It all started with a Phoenician merchant teaching in an Athenian walkway over 2,000 years ago.
It is remarkable how those ancient ideas continue to resonate with us today.
It really makes you wonder what ideas from our time will still be relevant 2,000 years from now. What would Zeno think if he could see the world we live in today?
That's an intriguing question. But for now, I think he'd encourage us to focus on what we can control, living our best lives today in accordance with reason and virtue.
Well said. And on that note, we'll leave you with this thought. If Zeno could walk through that Athenian walkway and into our modern world, what would surprise him most? And what wisdom would he share with us? Until next time, keep diving deep and seeking those timeless nuggets of wisdom wherever you may find them.